Thank you, Jared. Thanks everyone for opportunity to talk about some of the updates on soybean weed control. And so yes, I'll just jump right into it here. Oh, I want to acknowledge Barb Scott, who has worked with me for a number of years, who really is instrumental in a lot of this research. Some of the things I want to cover today is hitting on this topic of herbicide shortages, particularly glyphosate and glufosinate. And then, if they do come to fruition, some of the things to think about. And then a little bit on enlist soybeans wrapping up at the end. And my keywords or key phrase for my presentation is going to be right time. I do want to put in a plug for our extension publications that that are a regional effort. This is something that we update every year. It's in the states of Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia are all involved in putting these publications together. Because there are multiple states, there's a couple of different publications that use the identical information. And one is the Pennsylvania publication. The full agronomy guide has all of our information in there, as well as the pest management guide for field crops from Virginia Tech. So there's two publications, and as far as the weed control sections, they are identical between the two. One of the differences is the agronomy guide at Penn State gets published every 2 years. So we did not, they're not publishing the full guide this year. So some of the updates would not be in there, but they do have a smaller publication for 2022 that has the weed science information there. That's available through the Penn State Extension Publications Office. The Virginia Tech Guide is published every year. If you want a hard copy, it is there's a fee for it, but it's also available online free as a PDF. And so this is the Virginia Cooperative Extension Publications. Their number there is 456-016. And again, that's a way of getting this information free of charge as a PDF. Identical information, just two different ways of presenting it. As I was putting this talk together and thinking about what I wanted to cover, particularly in light of shortages, I thought what I'd do is kind of go back to where we were in 1996. That was the first guide that, or maybe the second guide that I was involved with at the University of Delaware. And I started to compare what was in the guide in 96 versus what we have now. It's surprisingly how little change there's been over the years. Yes, we've had a few changes, and some of them are quite noticeable. The glufosinate became more available. I think in 1996 it was Ignite and available as a burn down herbicide, but now we've got it available as in the Liberty Link technology for over-the-top application in soybeans. The group 4s, particularly the 2,4-D, was in our 96 guide as a burn down. But again, with the new traits of enlist and extend, we can use 2,4-D or Dicamba over the top of emerged soybeans. That's new. The other active ingredients that have been added, pyroxsulfone in the products of Zidua or the Anthem products, carfentrazone and fluthiazide, which are AIM and Cadet, and then Sharpen. So we added one of the residual chlorocetamide type herbicides and 2 more PPOs. But in reality, as far as active ingredients, those are the only major changes we've seen in our guide since 1996. We have lost a few. Oh, I see. I missed one here. I didn't have lasso on the on this. We no longer have lasso available, and vernalate or vernam. You know, I don't think there were a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth when we lost vernam, but we do have a lot of premixes that we have lost over the years. The active ingredients have really changed very little since 1996. And, you know, reason why I went back that far was to look at some information, gather some information on this, you know, what we should consider. Should glyphosate and glufosinate be short this year? There's all the manufacturers are talking about it. You know, I think sometimes when the message gets delivered, it's interpreted that they're not going to be available, and that's not the case. They're going to be available. It's just there might be tight supplies, and so you know may not get as much of it as you've had available in past years. But this isn't just the major brands of Roundup and Liberty. It's all the different brands of these active ingredients, and that also includes the premixes that use these herbicides. So products like Flexstar GT, which is fomasafen plus glyphosate, or Sequence, which is metolachlor plus glyphosate. They could also be in short supply. They also might be opportunities to, you know, get some access to glyphosate if you can't buy the straight goods. So keep that in mind. So again, they'll be available, but supplies are likely to be limited. So, you know, if you haven't had the conversation with your retailer, do so. Find out how much is going to be available, how much you can expect. May even want to consider getting delivery early so you have it on hand, so you know exactly how much you've got to use for this year. There's been a couple of recent announcements from the EPA in regards to some of our newer traded soybeans, particularly the Extend and the Enlist. As of now, it appears that as of now, we don't have any changes for Dicamba products for soybeans for 2022. You know, we still have the same considerations regards to tank mixes and the limits, what we can use as tank mixes with this technology. Adjuvants have remained the same as far as what can be added and what needs to be added. In particular, some of the volatility reduction agents and drift retardant agents that have to be used in combination with the products of Ingenia and Tavium XtendiMax. The buffers, the downwind buffers, whether it's sensitive areas or sensitive crops, still are all in place. When using this, it's required training. Yeah, you have to do annual training for this. And the June 30th cutoff date is still in place. So after June 30th, these products cannot be applied to soybeans. EPA looked at Dicamba hard this past fall, particularly in light of the continued issues with off-target movement in the Midwest. And just before Christmas, released a statement that the regulatory tools that the agency could use to address severity of Dicamba issues are not likely to be imposed or implemented by the 2022 growing season. And so they're saying that at this point, there's going to be no changes in Dicamba use going into the 2022 season. I'm not sure quite how to interpret that could there be changes, or will they wait till, if they make any changes, will they wait till after the 2022 season? So I would keep your ears to the ground on that as to what might be going on. 2 days ago, EPA released the the new registration for Enlist soybeans. So they granted the Enlist for a 7-year registration, so it'll be available till 2029. One of the things about this registration, it was the first herbicide registered at the EPA with a more fuller integration of the Endangered Species Act. So a lot of groups have been really after the EPA or not fully considering the Endangered Species Act with their registration. And so going forward, that's going to be a much bigger consideration when pesticides are registered. And so this was really the first product where they took that approach and implemented some of that in their decision making. So some of the restrictions, precautions on the label for the Enlist is going to emphasize preventing herbicide movement off the field through rainwater or irrigation water. What they want to do is ensure that the products are not leaving the field through lateral flow or through runoff of the water. And so the restriction is not to apply it if significant rainfall is expected within 48 hours of application. The flip side of that is getting water or irrigation rainfall shortly after application can, in many cases, improve activity because we're moving it into the plant and making sure the plants don't have environmental stress. So there's going to be some trade-offs on that. The other big emphasis within the EPA on pesticide registration is avoiding pollinator exposure. So in order to address this issue, the cutoff timing for Enlist on Enlist soybeans has changed. It previously was at the R2 stage, and now it's moved earlier to the R1 stage so that pollinators won't be in the field. Pollinators that use the pollen from soybeans or cotton or any of the other Enlist crops, they won't be in the field foraging when that Enlist is being applied. So a slight earlier application timing on that. But there is no cutoff date. It's a cutoff stage based on the soybean. They now will require mandatory training for this. And so this was, as I mentioned, just announced 2 days ago. So final labels aren't available. Last night I was looking at the Enlist website, and they had a box there, disclaimer, more information coming. The site is being updated. So stay tuned to that. Just some reminders about it, use of Enlist for this coming year, and these that were on the previous label. We still have a 30-foot buffer to sensitive areas. Still need to be sure we check the website for allowed adjuvants, tank mixes, and required nozzles for use. And much of this is centered around drift reduction. With potential shortage or with Dicamba, the Enlist and Extend, I think, are potential bigger players than they might have been the last couple of years. Just a couple of things to mention with that, and that is the challenge of grass control with this technology. The plant growth regulator herbicides, Dicamba, 2,4-D, do not control grasses, and so if grasses are in the field, something that we're going to have to contend with and plan accordingly. It's particularly in the last few years with this technology, there's been a lot of work and observations about reduced grass control when products like Post, Select, and Assure are used in combination with Dicamba and 2,4-D. And this has been observed with not just the Enlist traits or the Extend traits, but all formulations of 2,4-D and Dicamba. And many cases in the past couple of years, when we may have had glyphosate in the tank, when along with that, it may have and overcame some of this antagonism. But if glyphosate isn't in the tank, it's something to be well aware of, that grass control could be an issue this coming year with this technology. So if glyphosate is going to be short, some things to think about. One, again, it's going to be. It looks like it's going to be short. It's not good. It's not that it won't be available. So, knowing how much you've got, knowing what your problem fields are, your difficult fields, where have you struggled with weed control? Those would be the ones to help prioritize where that glyphosate is used, and particularly in grassy fields would be one thing. Because we don't have, the challenges of grass control, particularly in light of antagonism. Fields that are hard to treat in a timely fashion. Most of these other products, their maximum height on the label is much shorter than it is with glyphosate. So applying it while the weeds are small and susceptible, so it gives us a shorter window, much more critical to make that application at the right time. So so fields that are far, fields that are hard to get to, maybe ones you want to consider for glyphosate to give you a little bit wider window of application. And also because obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but it's often easier to achieve better control with glyphosate. So fields that might be going into a vegetable crop or a crop next year that's important to keep clean. You're going to put more of an emphasis on weed control this year in those fields. Might be ones that you want to prioritize for glyphosate. I think over your whole rotations, I think there's going to be more value for glyphosate in soybeans than there is in corn, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. The other is paying attention to use rates, using rates that are appropriate for crop size, weed size, instead of just using kind of a generic 32 fluid ounces, targeting that rate for the right size weeds. I apologize for those who have seen this before at the corn session, but I wanted to, those who weren't there, and also just to be sure to emphasize the importance of rate with glyphosate. This is just kind of an example of what I was talking about matching up the right rate. Glyphosate is available in a number of products. Glyphosate is an acid, and in order to improve its stability and improve its performance, it's formulated as a salt. There's different types of salts that are used: potassium salt, isopropylamine salt, dimethylamine salt. Those salts have different weights. So when the when glyphosate plus the salt is combined, the total pounds of product per gallon changes some. And so in order to compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges, we look at what is the acid equivalent of those different products. So for the Roundup Power Max 3, the new formulation, that's a 4.8 pounds acid equivalent. Compare that to, say, a product like Durango, which is a 4-pound acid equivalent, or Makazi, 3-pound acid equivalent. If you want to apply glyphosate at 1.13 pounds acid equivalent per acre, which is kind of been the rate of the quart rate of the Power Max, to get the same acid equivalent, it'd be a little bit less of the Power Max 3, 30 ounces, but it would be more of these other products. So matching up the right product with the right rate is important. I think there's going to be more interest in doing some spiking of glyphosate tank mixtures this year, particularly if we're using a prepackaged mix of 2 or 3 products that one of them might be glyphosate. That glyphosate rate may not be adequate. So wanting to spike that and making sure you get the right rate of glyphosate. Well, it's going to be important also to keep in mind what formulation you're using. If you're adding, say, as an example, 8 fluid ounces of these different products, how much acid equivalent are you getting with that? And so going from the Roundup Power Max 3, it's almost 1/3 of a pound, whereas with the less concentrated formulations, you're at 8 fluid ounces, you only get 1.8 fluid or 1.8 pounds of the Makazi. So keeping that active rate, keeping an effective rate is going to be important to be aware of what the formulations we're using. Remember, in this case, we're not replacing glyphosate. Now we're using different products. And so the mindset's got to be slightly different. We're using different herbicides. Different herbicides have different requirements in terms of application. It may need to be applied differently. And again, oftentimes these are not as effective on larger weeds, so it's really important that we apply them at the right time. Just some examples to consider in light of potential glyphosate shortage. Paraquat is not as effective for soybean burn down than it's not as effective in soybeans as we see in corn. And primarily because our weeds are much taller when we go in to burn down soybean ground. Think back to prior to the Roundup Ready and using a lot of glyphosate in our burn down programs, we were using Paraquat, but we were using sequential applications of Paraquat. Just a slide looking at the same group of horseweed here. One in the upper right photograph was taken about 4 weeks prior to soybean planting. Notice that most of the mare's tail there is 4 to 5 inches tall, but we delay that application 3 weeks, 4 weeks. The horseweed at that time of year is growing very, very rapidly. Now we're looking at 8+ inches on that mare's tail. So, trying to control mare's tail in soybeans, particularly with later burn down, is going to be challenging. So it's, again, puts more in it, emphasis on applying it at the right time. Some options, if you're looking to, what you can do in light of glyphosate shortages, we have found over the years for consistent control in soybeans, particularly things that fields infested with mare's tail, that we go out early. And by that, again, spraying 4 to 5 inch tall mare's tail, not 6, 8 inches tall. That often means that we're applying our burn downs about 4 weeks before we're planting soybean. Well, we're going out 4 weeks before we plant soybeans. We're going to have a number of weeds that emerge between that application time and planting. And in many cases, we need 2 applications, one for that early burn down and one right at planting for our residual. So we're looking at kind of a 2-pass program prior to planting soybeans. So, and that's with glyphosate as well. So if we don't have, some of these fields where we may not have enough glyphosate to go around, then one of the options would be something like a Dicamba or 2,4-D in combination with a Clermiron product. So like 2,4-D or Extendamax. Remember, if you're using one of these Dicamba products and spraying earlier than what the label recommends, you have to make sure that you're using the traded products of Dicamba. But using 2,4-D or Dicamba in combination with Canopy EX or Synchrony over the years has been a pretty good program in many cases. But then it needs to be followed up with Paraquat. With Paraquat, we like to see metribuzin. It improves the performance of Paraquat, and then additional residuals at planting. So that early application of 2,4-D and Dicamba, with Clermiron for early burn down, and then a second at planting. Problem with a program like that, we don't control grasses. So what do we do in that scenario? And if we were to include a grass herbicide, we're likely to see antagonism. As I mentioned earlier, the 2,4-D and Dicamba don't play nice with these post-emergence grass herbicides, so we're liable to reduce grass control. So this might be a case, if you have a grassy field, this might be a case, and this is why, prioritizing which fields you have, what problems you have, making sure you put glyphosate in those fields where you can get the best bang for your buck. Those who have cover crops planted fields that are going to go into soybeans, this is an area too where you might be able to cut back on some of your products you use for burn down. Delaying that termination closer to planting. So maybe only one burn down application is needed. Oftentimes with cover crops, if we go out, terminate them 4 weeks before planting, there's not enough cover crop residue there to suppress later emerging weeds. So we need a second application at planting. With cover crops and delaying that termination closer to planting, 2 to 10 days, or 2 weeks to 10 days before planting, often we get away with one application that includes both our burn down and our residuals at that time. So one way too, making allowing the glyphosate to stretch over more acres. Going back to our considerations, and this is certainly nothing new, but because glyphosate's been such an effective product, we've been able to maybe not pay as much attention to some of these considerations. But this is something that these fields where there might be shortages, be sure that you keep in mind, what are there tank mixtures that are going to be needed if I don't have glyphosate in the tank? If I use a premix, is there sufficient ratio in there? Not all premixes are the same. Oftentimes the formulations for our premixes were formulated for the Midwest. They're not sufficient or appropriate for our area. So if we use premixes, in some cases, we have to spike additional material in to get the right rates. What's the adjuvants that we need? We can't rely on that glyphosate with its fully loaded adjuvant system. Are we using the right adjuvants? Droplet size, spray volume, and again, is there any antagonism or potentially enhanced control with our tank mixtures? So, kind of the mantra for effective weed control. We start clean. Be sure we use the right products for the weeds that are present, making sure, relying on experience or using our resources like the Mid-Atlantic Weed Management Guide or the same information that's in the Virginia Tech Pest Management Guide for our ratings on effective control. Apply it at the right rate using the labeled rate. Some products, there's a rate range and you have a little bit of a leeway in there, but other products, there's one rate. So this is not the year to be looking at trying to get away with cut rates, but using the full labeled rates and apply it at the right time. And using non-chemical integrated strategies as much as you can, focusing on preventing weed seeds, rotating crops, so we can rotate chemistries with that, and maximizing the competitiveness of our crop. Make sure we're using good agronomics, using narrow row spacing to get a tighter, quicker crop canopy, really important for full season weed control. And if fields, we have some escapes or inadequate weed control, that we don't spread our problems from field to field, that we plan our harvest accordingly and not spread seeds with the combine. So more information on the integrated weed management strategies available here at the GROW website, growiwm.org. This is a collaborative effort that my group is very involved with, as well as weed scientists across the eastern half of the U.S. And I do also want to, in addition to Barb, who's been so helpful for our program, I also want to make sure I acknowledge some other support, particularly a lot of the herbicide manufacturers who help supply a lot of the products that we test, the Carville farm staff and administrative staff that's so helpful, financial support from the Delaware Soybean Board, and the undergraduates in miscellaneous wage help that I have, all really instrumental in making the program